March 16th, 2020, the day New York City was put on complete lockdown. I was on spring break with little to do and nowhere to go. My school trip to China had been canceled months ago, and my backup plan of a college road trip was also put on hold. That morning, I was watching Governor Cuomo's daily coronavirus briefings with my mom, and I heard all restaurants are closed effective 8 p.m. tonight. Schools will be closed for the next 2 weeks. Non-essential workers must begin working from home. Do not leave your house unless absolutely necessary. And I thought, oh my God, this is real. Now, I'll admit I knew about COVID since January, but I never thought it would be this bad or that New York would become the epicenter of it all. Fast forward a couple of weeks, it's April 15th. Spring break is over, remote school has just begun, and the initial shock of being in quarantine is gone, but the feelings of loneliness and uncertainty are still there. As I was half-heartedly doing my homework since we switched to a pass-fail grading system, I thought to myself, all right, Sadie, stop being lazy and do something with this global pandemic. After all, you love history, and this is a very historic time you are living through. So I began thinking, what could I do to record and preserve this life-changing experience? And then I realized.
I knew about it in December.
I didn't hear about it until the end of January.
Yeah, I was not aware of Corona until like early March.
How did you guys feel when you first heard about it?
I was not that surprised because for me, it was not. And for most people at Packer and for the States, it was news. But for me, it was no news. I've been having this conversation with my class since December, when Chinese New Year just started and when this virus just started. And I even remember vividly that I told my class, I said, on the day when Wuhan got locked down, and I asked my students, I said, can you guys imagine New York City got locked down? And one of my kids said, that's not possible. How can they do that? How will they do that? And I was like, oh, well, that might happen. We don't know. And now see, here we are.
I don't think I could have ever expected this. I remember that conversation, my attitude from that day. I thought people are always exaggerating. The news is always exaggerating, and we only need to calm down. But looking back now, it was the right thing to do to close down.
I'm with Will. Dr. Bayer. I'll own that I definitely didn't understand like the scale of it as it was like coming. Like I remember reading the news and everything like before like it hit New York City, and yeah, we're expecting this, but we're also not doing anything. So maybe I don't really need to worry because nobody's doing anything. And I also really didn't understand how it was going to be different than any other flu. Then when I had to start like really canceling plans, it started dawning on me. And of course, just seeing the numbers and thinking about what they represent in terms of like human life. Looking back at this, I kind of like feel dumb for not fully appreciating like the gravity of it.
Yeah, I was like that too. Even though I had been following it on the news since it started in China, I still didn't like understand the seriousness of it until Governor Cuomo shut down New York City. How's it been at home, being stuck with the same people 24/7?
My family and I were just talking about this last night, like how during lockdown, this is the most times we've ever had a family dinner together because my dad was always a late worker, especially during these months, which are tax season. I would never see him. But the amount of family dinners we've had sitting down at the table, all eating at the same time is like absurd. And I'm actually really enjoying that. I think we all are.
For me, it's the opposite. Like my family, we spend a lot more time together, but I don't think you'll be seeing me at school next year because soon we are going to absolutely hate each other and like probably go our own separate ways.
So I am in lockdown with my husband and my 8 and 5-year-old daughters. And over the weekend, we actually drove 20 hours from New York City to Nebraska to lock down with my mother in Omaha, because between my own job and homeschooling and my husband working, it was getting really difficult for us to manage our own stress. And the biggest priority for me at this time is protecting the mental health of my children as we get through this. So I thought that they would be less stressed with more loving adults and more space to play. I think that my husband and I have had to become more of a team in terms of dividing up duties and knowing when someone needs a break. There's been a lot more unspoken communication between us, where he can tell that I've had a rough day and he can take the kids for a walk, and I can tell when he needs a break as well. So I think that our nonverbal communication has gotten better.
I can relate to that. My wife and I are in our apartment on the Upper West Side, and it's been great. And I think the ultimate test of any relationship is to have one person, or just immediate family, as sort of your only real contact every day. Our apartment is pretty small, and so I would say that it might be the most challenging thing about it, just making sure that we each have space carved out for ourselves during the day. But we've learned to communicate with each other more, and we make it work. So there are things about the situation that are actually, kind of strengthening relationships. And I would say that's true for my wife and me.
That's great. I'm quarantining with my mom, and I'd say our relationship has also gotten stronger in some ways because of having to be stuck together all the time. But do any of you feel lonely ever?
Yeah, for sure. Because my interactions are pretty limited to my husband and my dog Captain. And I've connected with people over FaceTime and Zoom and stuff, but it's not the same. It's a little bit I feel like I read this metaphor in an article somewhere, but it's like you're craving a homemade blueberry muffin, and instead you just eat tons of those little artificial fake blueberry processed muffins or whatever, to try to scratch that itch, but it's never enough, and then you just feel not great at the end of it. So it's they're kind of stopgap measures, but yeah, I definitely miss people.
Me too. It does feel pretty lonely. It's funny how even some people that you don't connect with as much as you do others, you start to miss those people too. I miss everybody at Packer, and I never thought I would say it, but I actually miss going to work. I leave my house very early in the morning and I drive and get stuck in traffic, and I never thought I'd miss those types of things, because honestly, there's probably nothing more I dislike than being stuck in traffic, but I actually am starting to miss it.
Being with my family this whole time, I don't know if I've been lonely, as lonely as people who are quarantining alone, but I miss people a lot. It's definitely like you're on your own island kind of thing.
I live alone, but I don't think I've hit lonely yet. I miss people, but I don't feel lonely necessarily.
Yeah, I think missing people is the hardest part of all this. For me, while I of course miss learning in person or going outside, it's people that I miss the most.
Same. It's just sad not seeing people, but not even my friends, but just people in my grade, daily interactions and talking to people. And the little interactions I would have had with people who I wouldn't normally talk to, people I'm not close enough to FaceTime now. I miss being able to say hi to them and asking them how they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's the students that I currently teach, but it's also the relationships from former students like you, and just all the hallway interactions and the office interactions and commons, and just all those places where you run into people and have these meaningful connections, even if it's just 2 minutes. Now everything's you have to seek those people out as opposed to just bumping into them.
Definitely. The only interaction I've had with the Packer community is through Zoom calls. I mean, mostly just the few staff meetings, but but I wouldn't even call my staff meetings interacting with my community. So I definitely miss just running into students and faculty and just chatting with them.
Yeah, I think those are just the little things that we often overlook in life. And we all know this, right? Like when you have it, you don't really cherish it. When you don't have it, you want it. And the grass is always greener on the other side. We grew up with those terms. We always often have been told this, but I think this time we're really living the experience of what that means.
Yes, absolutely. How do you think this has affected your mental health?
I've been fine. Like I've been able to stay connected with people, but I think in the future we're going to be like really lonely. We spent so much time alone, especially like for younger kids, like it's their really formative years, and to be alone for that long of a time, like I have to think that that will take a toll on people's mental health in the future too.
Yeah, the mental health implications of this on our children, I think, has the potential to be worse than the pandemic itself. And that people who are keeping kids inside for 50 plus days, that it definitely creates fear in children.
I definitely worry about my children socially, but I also, on the flip side, I don't know how much it matters given how young they are. I mean, I don't remember anything about being 3. And I know that it's a formative time. So whatever happens during this time does sort of set some sort of foundation. But I also think the foundation that's being set is that your parents are here for you. You're in an environment where you're being nurtured and taken care of. So even if they're not at school, given the ages that they are, I'm not really that worried about what they're missing.
Yeah. What do you guys think about the economic impact of COVID? Like how many people are struggling to buy food and how it's hit communities of color hardest?
My heart is with them. We all have different kinds of struggles, but there's nothing as bad as worrying about putting food on the table for your children. I mean, I'm lucky that I still have a job. I can still provide for myself. I think that we definitely need to see some larger changes. I think that this is a time where we really need to reevaluate the way our society is organized when it comes to medical care, with being tied to employment, when it comes to childcare. I think that this is definitely a time where we need to fight in any way to change the system, because I don't think there's any sort of brighter highlight on how flawed it is.
I completely agree with Miss Morse. I was frustrated that people were surprised when the demographics of how COVID-19 has affected certain communities came out, and just feeling like, why are we surprised by these numbers? Like, why are we surprised by this reality? And then sadly, our president and other politicians across the country, it feels as though when there was a light shed on the demographics around who was dying at a higher rate, they did nothing because it was like, well, we're not dying from this, so I think we're good.
Yeah, especially with the indigenous population, Doctors Without Borders, for the first time, is had to work within the United States when they went to the Navajo Nation. I think it highlights the fact that there's a lot of tremendous discrepancy in the quality of life in lots of places where indigenous peoples live, right? My father is an indigenous physician, and he and a lot of other indigenous physicians are sort of in a national organization. They were told not to mention the name of the disease, and they couldn't talk about the disease, and there were certain drugs that they weren't allowed to mention, and certain procedures they weren't allowed to talk about. So I mean, I think that's a really great example of how the government knows that it should be doing something to help, but it's only so concerned with maintaining the status quo that, as far as the indigenous population are concerned, they're not putting indigenous healthcare in a place where it can be successful.
Yeah, it's terrible what's happening to the indigenous, and the news is barely talking about it. I also think the middle class is something that is really in danger. I think that those who maybe had an abundance of cash available, I think that there are ways they've been impacted by this time, but I think overall they'll be okay. I think those people that have had food insecurity or a lack of resources are the ones who will really be impacted by this economic fallout. So I think that the socioeconomic divide will be larger.
Yeah, I agree. I think COVID has really highlighted a lot of problems in our society and our institutions. How do you guys feel about the government's response to COVID-19?
Well, I
Oh,
think
sorry. Oh,
based
sorry. You can go.
Thank you. I think based on what they were handed, I think they've been doing a good job because there's so many unknown variables. And I know people even like to take these most tragic times and turn them political, but I'm not a very political person. But for the most part, I think that the president and the governors are doing a good job. I mean, anybody is going to say he mishandled it, she mishandled it, because they obviously want to influence the voters. But for the most part, I think they're doing a good job.
I was thinking the opposite. I mean, I think Governor Cuomo is handling this well, but as I said before, there's just so many problems with how the federal government is handling this.
I- Yeah, I agree with that. Sorry, finish.
Like the way they've been tackling it now has just been nonsense. Like it obviously isn't working. Like they need to provide hospitals with all the things that they need to treat patients. They need to figure out how to spread reliable information to people that normally wouldn't get it. And in terms of healthcare, it's just crazy that our country is considered powerful and rich, but we don't even have free healthcare. Like obviously the US just cares about money and not actual human lives.
But I think that the government is doing the best.
I agree with Bryn. I think that the federal government's response was really lacking. They were not efficient. They waited too long to take important measures. They have no support for essential workers and healthcare workers. New York went from one case to being the epicenter because of that. And the federal government needs to take charge here and not leave it up to the state.
But the government can't do what
fault on behalf of the government.
I think the government is doing
My
the best
family is in China.
under the circumstances.
My family is in China, and I don't support everything Chinese government that is doing. They said nobody can go out, but also in US, there's too much freedom. There are not a lot of rules.
I understand what you're saying, but I think the government is doing the best they can. I don't see why everyone has to make it so political.
It's political because our government is supposed to be leading the country through this crisis and they're not. Like the president didn't do anything because he was thinking that if anything went wrong, he wouldn't have to take the blame and he could just like blame the governors for not doing certain things. And then like he just started getting mad at states and threatening to not fund them if they didn't treat him nicely. I mean, sure, Trump's doing some things now, but like the lack of appropriate response from the White House and like the true lack of leadership just made things worse.
Yeah, I saw an article in the Times this morning and it said if the government had responded more in a more organized fashion, if it had taken it more seriously, tens of thousands of people would be alive. That's just unconscionable.
As someone who has lost a loved one, my friend Gloria Katz actually just died last Friday, and it does make me upset that her death might have been preventable. I think that the government could have done more, especially since they knew about it as early as December. I mean, for Gloria, by the time she died, there had been so many stages of deterioration that it was neither a surprise nor in some ways even a blow, because it was for the best at the end. And she was a wonderful woman who lived a wonderful life, but it was just a huge disappointment that her loved ones could not be with her in her final days or even give her a proper funeral.
My condolences, Miss Thorson. I also lost a good friend of mine, a gentleman in my PhD cohort. He was an older man, I guess mid to late 60s. We had spent the last 3 years going to different seminars together. He lived in New York, and his wife and I are friends, and so we would sort of just like support each other. He came to my dissertation defense, and I've been to his house, and he was my friend, and so it was really, really, really painful to lose him. And what's been really painful is seeing the impact that it's had on his family and how hard it's been for them and how they don't really have the closure that they need yet. And they had to say goodbye to him on the phone because they couldn't get into the hospital. And then they had to figure out how to get his things, and they couldn't have the ritual of a funeral for him. I agree, though. I think that maybe if the government had done more sooner, he would still be here. Oh, I'm tearing up.
So sorry for your loss. I actually had COVID myself. I'm not mad at the government, but I hope they can stop it soon because it was something that I wish no one could get.
I'm so sorry. What was it like having COVID?
I got it from my sister. She had COVID, so I was like taking care of her. But then after a while, I began to find that I was not breathing well and I started feeling weak. So then that's when I had to go to the hospital. When we got to the urgent care, they took the x-ray of my lungs and told me that it was in my lungs. They told me I had to go to the emergency room. So when I got there, the emergency room, they took me in right away. And it really affected my breathing, and I was weak, I was kind of cold. Then I felt like I wasn't breathing air, like I was wheezing, and then my oxygen levels were down, like could not even walk or anything like that. But I wasn't that bad. And there's some people, you don't go right away. Your lungs keep on destroying, and then your breathing, and then your heart. I didn't really feel that scared because, after I went into the hospital, I thought that, oh, people are dying, but I don't know, I might make it home. And I went home after 5 or 6 days in the hospital.
Wow. When you were in the hospital, was there anything you did to help you cope?
One thing that I'm happy about, the nurses and doctors were very nice with me. They took good care of me, especially when I was upset. Sometimes they said, breathe deep, breathe deep. And they said, you're fine. Also, I think the doctor had some communication with my nephew because I got a call from him one day and he said, Aunt, I'm right outside the hospital. I just want you to know you are not alone. I am right there with you. And I said, no, he had to drive from New Jersey. I said, no, I don't want you here. I don't want you to be outside. And he said, no, I want you to know you're not alone. I'm right outside of the hospital. I'm right there in my car. And he did that for like 3 to 4 days because he said he wanted me to be comfortable and let me know that family was close to me.
That's really sweet. Is there anything else anyone's done to help stay positive?
Yeah, I think like running, reading, listening to podcasts. Also just being a parent to young children, you just have to put yourself aside. And I think that it can be draining and incredibly exhausting, but I also feel really grateful that I have my kids to focus on because I can't get too caught up in worrying about things because I need to be engaging with them. And that I actually find is very helpful.
I've actually been cooking a lot. I know a lot of people have been cooking and baking during this time. So I've been baking bread and cookies and like banana bread and sourdough. And it's something I've never done before. We have so much uncertainty in the world. It's nice to be like, you need this much flour and this much sugar and this much butter, or you need to feed your sourdough starter this often. So I've been doing a lot of baking.
I agree. That's why I started a cooking show. Cooking a lot of Chinese food, because usually I don't, but cooking has helped me. When I miss my family in China, it helped me feel less homesick.
I'm not a baker or a cook, but for me, though, like Ms. Thorson said, provided the opportunity to exercise and run, for me, it's catharsis. I need some degree of exertion to keep me going. So definitely exercise has been helpful.
Same. I would actually describe myself as pretty active right now because I've been out a lot, doing a lot of exercise. I think it's helped me keep pretty optimistic day to day because it's given me a goal. Like I've been setting goals for myself, which keeps me thinking about something throughout the day instead of just Corona.
I think anything that helps keep your mind away from the news and all the bad things that are happening right now is great to do. I also find a lot of comfort in the way that the community's been handling it. I mean, everybody's sort of pitching in and giving it their best. The Packer community's been really great at just sort of just making the best of what we have in a way that I've been really proud of.
Absolutely. This whole experience has reminded me how valuable the Packer community is. And it's a really good reminder not to take it for granted, right? Because I've just been a part of it for so long that I'm just used to being such a warm and welcoming and great place to work and spend my days. And just missing it as much as I do reminds me of how lucky I am to have this job that I have.
Yeah, I miss Packer so much. Like, I love Packer, just like being in the school and seeing my teachers and like being in a classroom. Like, I don't think that I recognized how much love I had for Packer and how much I relied on it as a space that's like, in a lot of ways, like my first home.
Yeah, I definitely think this experience has made me realize how much the Packer community means to me and like how much joy I get just from going into school and being around my peers and my teachers. Anything else anyone's learned?
Definitely. Like, as much as this isn't like an ideal situation, I've actually learned a lot about myself. I think quarantine kind of forces you to like take a look at all the things you had before and be thankful for them. Like just being able to go to school or riding the train or ordering from a restaurant. And like also now I'm really grateful to have a roof over my head. I'm really grateful that like my parents are still working and are able to provide for my family and like our health insurance and access to good hospitals. So I think Corona has definitely shown the injustices and the issues that we have within our institutions, and it's made me definitely more grateful and thankful for everything that I do have.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to complain about all the troubles that we have, but when everything is put in perspective by something like this, you realize how fortunate you really are.
That's something I've had to counsel myself on. When stuff comes up or complaints, it's like, look, somebody has it worse. Somebody is dealing with more. Somebody is more sad, more anxious, more, grieving. Somebody is grieving. Someone has lost a loved one. So I've definitely learned to focus on all the things I have to be grateful for.
Also, like just putting people's well-being at the forefront. Like I feel like this has really emphasized that for me. Like before you engage with people on a level of like academics or business or any sort of like transaction or interaction you have with people, like we're all like vulnerable, like human beings. Like I hope I'll take like just more empathy for other people and for myself away from this.
Absolutely. There's this teeny tiny Italian restaurant in my neighborhood. The food is amazing. It's just as if you were in Italy. And then it closed. And then on Saturday, it opened up again for takeout. And I went there and ended up paying like double just because I was so happy it was open again. So now I have a really great appreciation for the neighborhood with the person at the dry cleaner or the people I talk to on the street, in the grocery store, in the restaurants, because just having that part of your life stripped away from you, all those connections made me realize what all those daily interactions really meant.
Yeah, this experience has made me see the actual important things. I thought unimportant things were more important than they really were, but now I see what doesn't matter and what counts in life, which is the people.
Yeah, definitely. So we're at our final minutes now, and I have one last question that I hope everyone can answer. What message would you give to future Packer students who might be viewing this years from now?
In the middle school, we had this conversation about racism based on the recent incident among African American community. But I'm hoping that Packer can bring the racial conversation more in the broadened way, because even during these 3 months, you can see there's a lot of racism. And it's not just towards one specific group, but we have not really talked about that in a very consistent way. We had an incident of American president called this virus as a Chinese virus, but we didn't get on the call and say, this is important. Let's talk about that. So for me, this is one thing that I'm really hoping Packer community in the future can really give it a thought.
If you were like me in a small, with a small worldview growing up, I thought that people who had experienced, extreme difficulties were maybe made of a different fiber. And I would have always said, oh, well, I could never because they must have, and I could never. Yet now I know, living through this and being older, that I would say that to those future Packer students, we are you. We are just like you. And, we have the strength and the fortitude and the heart to live through this and make something good of it afterwards. And they will too be able to face difficulties and find the strength they didn't know they had when they needed it.
I mean, I hope that this has sparked a stronger interest in science and a stronger interest in politics and public policy and education. I just hope that the next generation is thinking very carefully about the sciences and where we put our funding and where we put our funding into the sciences. I think that we need to put it into education. I feel that a little bit of our governing bodies, if a little bit of our governing bodies were more educated in science, then perhaps we wouldn't have gotten quite to the state we're in now.
I would say to future students that, always recognize things that can change, right? And they can change for the better and they can change for the worse. And that they should always expect change and that they need to be conscious about their own flexibility and resilience to move on with the change and through change, and to kind of accept things as they are and work as a community to make things better.
I would want future Packer students to know that, even though it sounds cliche, love up on your people and have people that you let in your life, have people that you care about in your life, and let people take care of you.
I think it's really important that you not take for granted the range of experiences that exist in the community, and the value reaching out to one another and just being supportive and empathetic and caring. It's something that I think is such a beautiful quality about the Packer community.
I think that for me, it would have been very useful to learn at a young age that even though we feel we have a sense of control over things, that we really don't. And life is about learning how to deal with the circumstances that surround you and trying to make the best of them.
Always make sure to surround yourself with people that you love and enjoy spending time with, because when you do that, you can get through anything. Even when the times are hard, there's still something positive.
Leadership matters. Even in times when things are good, when there's no pandemic, there needs to always be a task force that is vigilant and prepared for these events.
I'd say cherish time together and don't take it for granted.
Enjoy life because you don't know when it'll end.